Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. Before we get started, I'd love to shout out a recent Buy Me a Coffee that I have received from listener Pam S. She writes, I love to listen to your channel. You're a soft-hearted, amazing person. I think you do a wonderful job, and you're so dedicated to your work. Thank you for doing what you love. Love you, my friend. Keep up the good work. Thanks. Pam, extremely kind words. Thank you so much. And thank you for buying me a coffee. That helps me get some fuel on the way to interview people and different festivals and conferences. And that helps a whole ton. If you'd like to support me a one-time way by buying me a coffee as well, you can head over to buymeacoffee.com/Bigfoot Society. And it helps more than you know. Well, let's get on with the show.
All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to a gentleman tonight. His name is Rick. He had approached me through Facebook, I believe, and he's got some interesting stories, anecdotal evidence from over the years. Rick, how's it going? I'll let you take it from here.
Hey, doing pretty good, man. Thanks a lot for having me on. So I'm glad we can actually finally get together because you and I have kind of bounced back and forth on this for a number of months. So
it's been a long time coming.
Yeah. So one thing or another. So anyway, yeah, it's, and not to be overly vague, but I live in Oregon. I've lived in Oregon my whole life, pushing 60 years almost. And I just had an interest in this topic when Roger Patterson and Mr. Bob Gimlin put a movie out. And it's just been always intrigued with it ever since. So, and over the course of that time, as Jeremiah and I have spoke, I don't have any hair-raising encounters or stories for people. But over the course of time, I've met people, I've talked to people, I've got a lot of good friends. And, over all these years, I just have a lot of stories that make me more of a believer. I haven't seen one. I know there's knowers and believers out there. There's naysayers. There's people that are just don't know, and I don't know. But I hear enough, and have been interested enough in the topic for well over half a century that I said I've got some stories that are kind of cool to me, and I've kept track of them over the years. And I guess it's probably a good time to share some of those.
I love it. It sounds like you're being in Oregon in general doesn't matter where you're at. You're in a cool area, but it sounds like you're in a cool area. So I'm excited to hear. You've brushed paths with people that might be known to the Bigfoot community. But I'm excited to hear what you've gathered along the years. So,
well, and first and foremost, I'm not a researcher. I spend a lot of time in the woods. I hunt and fish. And my family and I have a lot of trail cameras that stick out in the mountains and all that. And again, I've got no groundbreaking, earth-shattering evidence that's going to be presented tonight. But I've got a lot of cool, interesting stories with a lot of people that, there's a lot of people out there who were never a believer until they became a believer or a knower. And there's those that have chased their entire lives and never really satisfied their need to know. But yeah, we live right at the base of Mount Hood. I've lived in Western Oregon my entire life. You got Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams. I spent a lot of times up in the northeastern Oregon, or Paul Freeman. Most people know about Paul Freeman as well. I'm very familiar with that country. And I've just got little bits and pieces from all these these areas that just kind of another pieces of the puzzle, I guess, so to speak. So, so what I put together is I've got a number of stories. Again, the vast majority of anecdotal, but that's all. The vast majority of those are second person. These are acquaintances and or friends of mine that we've just we've talked, we've had stories. So, so if you don't mind, I'll start off. I've kind of segregated this region by region, and then I said I'll just kind of start that way. I'll start with some kind of miscellaneous, and I'll kind of focus on a couple different regions. That Northeast Oregon area, obviously the Pacific, or the Mount Hood, Cascade Range, and up into Mount Hesse, Helens, in Washington as well. So, I'll start with kind of going chronologically as well. A couple miscellaneous ones. A good friend of my little brother, younger stepbrother, and again we're going back. This is probably back in the '80s, but and he told me the story years ago as well. But they were up in Montana, Lincoln, Montana. If anyone knows, kind of west central Montana, and there was a lot of reports and stories and sightings of Bigfoot back there in Lincoln, Montana, back in the mid '80s. So when I heard this story from my brother's friend Jeff, it was probably in the late '80s, early '90s. And Bigfoot to me back then, you didn't hear about Montana. You heard about Oregon, Washington, California, Canada. You didn't hear much about the Midwest, Texas, Oklahoma, wherever. But my brother's friend Jeff, I remember him telling us one day after they'd gone back to Montana, I think to see some family friends during the summer vacation, whatever, outside of school. And we started talking, and he knew we kind of had interest in Bigfoot. And they'd gone on a day hike out in the mountains outside of Lincoln. And as I come walking across, again, some of these things I'll kind of paint the vision I have from the interpretation I have of the stories that I heard these people over the years. This is what's probably in the details they gave me, and then the way I picture it. And they're coming back to their car. There's a kind of a big clearing on a high ridge, timber. They came out of the timber, a couple hundred yards back to the car, and as they're approaching their vehicle late in the afternoon, early evening, some people in the trailhead start running at them, pointing. And in this scenario, there'd been Bigfoot sightings and activity. And they turned around, and right on the edge of the timber, they see this large, dark figure turn and walk back in the timber on the trail, or in the vicinity of the trail, like it followed him out to the edge of the timber. And Jeff and his family had turned, and they just saw this large black figure turning and walking back in the timber. So, and really, that's just kind of, that's how a lot of my story is going to be. It's going to be stuff like that. But again, there's several of them. So,
well, so this is great, Rick, because I have listeners from all over, and people are going to be like, "Oh my goodness, Lincoln, Montana."
Yeah,
totally. I've seen one in Lincoln, Montana.
Well, and great, and ultimately that might be how this all comes together. Because I'll get into something. Actually, just a couple more down the line here. Yellowstone National Park on the east side of Yellowstone, Cody, Wyoming. There's a number of reported sightings and stories come out of there. Idaho, same thing. I've the Bauman incident, which goes way back, and Teddy Roosevelt talked about that. But again, it's when I was growing up and younger, it was Oregon, Washington, California, and then you get up into Canada as well. So, and as we see now, that's a, I don't know if you want to refer to it as a phenomenon or not, but it's not just Oregon, Washington, California, and Canada. So, again, just since these are not so much specifically regional, I've just got a couple miscellaneous stories. So that's the one, Lincoln, Montana, and back in the early to mid '80s, probably. A good friend of mine, I'll have a couple references to him. Avid outdoorsman. He's a non-believer, and we'll get to one of his stories a little bit later, more local. But a good friend of his that I've got to meet over the years. Again, a very simple story, but he was down, and I'm kind of reading off some notes as we go here, but down along the Oregon coast, Siletz River. Oregon coast has a good history too. You don't hear a lot about it. They're driving along, driving the road down the Siletz River, and this is probably back in the early 70s now, and just a tall black figure crosses the road in front of them. As a lot of sightings are, you're driving at night, and all of a sudden, bam, 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 2 or 3 steps, and that's the experience you have that the vast majority of the people in this country will never have, or in this world for that matter. So, a crossing of the highway heading down the Siletz, middle of the night, or not middle of the night, but probably evening. And so like I said, it's that's all I have on the story. But again, it's just an acquaintance of a friend that saw something that, can you explain it? Can you not? Whatever. And then finally, of my miscellaneous stories, this has to do with Yellowstone as well. Probably about 10 years ago, we used to go. My family and I used to go to Yellowstone. My wife and our kids, and even prior to kids, we used to go to Yellowstone quite a bit, once or twice a year. And again, having heard some of these stories, especially on the eastern boundary of Yellowstone, there's actually some photos from around Old Faithful, if anyone's seen those from a couple years ago in the snow. Possibly some Bigfoots walking amongst some bison or buffalo on the trail system out at Old Faithful in midwinter. But this is on the east and northeast end of Yellowstone. I just saw some very large impressions in the snow as we're driving through, in 2 or 3 feet of snow in an area that typically deer and elk are not going to be that time of year. And we slowed down and I took a look at them. I didn't hop out. But it was just interesting because that section of eastern Yellowstone getting into western Wyoming on the backside of it has, over the last number of years, I've seen, heard, and read several stories of sightings, encounters, whatever. So I just saw big impressions. Big impressions in what to me would be knee to thigh deep snow crossing the road.
So you personally did yourself. Wow. Okay. How far apart were those?
It's significant enough. So you see these photos from time to time in the snow, Alberta, Canada, BC, or wherever, and deer in deeper snow will hop and post hole bounce. And I didn't get out and look in those holes,
sure,
to see exactly what it was. You're in the Rocky Mountains. You're in an area that's getting pretty dang cold, and the vast majority of wildlife migrate out of those higher elevations. And this is probably February-ish or so, probably near this peak snowpack. And it was just to see the impressions. They're just big oval type of impressions in snow at a relatively at 3 to 4 foot-ish type of distance. But that being said, also, I mean, if something is stepping that, you would expect maybe some toe dragging some snow. And we just slowed down. We went past that area once, and turned around, came back, and I just to specifically look at those impressions in the snow. It could have been a deer. There should not have been deer up there. Not to say there wasn't. Most likely not elk. They don't typically hop like that, especially in snow environments. So they'll plow their way through. There's bison up there. There's moose, but same thing. They're big, strong animals. If they're living up in that, they're just plowing a trail through that.
Oh yeah, definitely.
They're not hopping or post holing, stotting or something like that. So it was just an observation driving through Yellowstone Park in an area that there is recent history of experiences and encounters, whatever. Again, anecdotal, what it was, I didn't get out and look specifically, is it a 5 to 18-inch track in the snow.
Right.
It's just like, it was probably sub-zero. And
you're like, I'll stay in the car.
Yeah, exactly. And I've kicked myself in the butt ever since. I should have got out, at least stick my nose in one of those, see what the bottom of it looks like. I just did.
Right. Hey, you never know, right?
And that's it. And that's a lot of people probably the same thing. You see some of these videos online, and why they stop filming? Why did they chase it or pursue it? Or they didn't go look at tracks. Well, I didn't see a creature. I don't know what made those. It was impressions of snow and an animal made of some sort. So that being said, those are more my miscellaneous, but I'll start focusing a little more on some of the more regional and closer to my part of the world, Western Oregon, Western Washington. One of those, Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens, Matt Adams, Roger Patterson lived in Yakima, which is right in that same region, and doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. I guess he did a lot of research up there. But so along the Columbia River, and I don't know how many listeners you have here and how many will see this later. I don't know how many live in the Pacific Northwest, how many are familiar with what all goes on out here. Some will probably know more than others, and I don't know it all by any means. But along the Columbia River, there was a local little newspaper. This probably would have been the late 60s. And my grandparents lived up there in a little town, or out in the country outside of the little community of Washougal, Washington. And my dad had gone to high school up there and all that. And I remember the little local paper one day had a sketch drawing of one of the local guys who, coincidentally, my dad had gone to school with, said he's always kind of a kooky dude. But he's driving up the highway on the Washington side of the Columbia River, which is the Columbia River Gorge. It's a big, beautiful natural feature. And in the fog in front of him, he sees something leaning across the road, thought it was a tree. And as he approaches it, so this is the Skamania County, which Skamania County has a law that it's illegal to kill a Sasquatch. And this is something from around the 60s or early 70s. As a county ordinance or whatever, it's illegal to kill a Sasquatch in Skamania County, Washington. So along the highway, along the Columbia River, the guy my dad had gone to school with and wrote it up in the paper. You drive along, you see something looks like a tree leaning across the 2-lane remote little highway in the dark. And as he in the fog, and as he approaches, the thing continues to walk across the road. So the paper comes out. They have a little sketch. My dad goes, I know that guy. He's kind of a goofy dude in high school. But as a result of that, and there's been a number of sightings along that section of the, I remember the Highway 16 or something. I can't remember the name, the highway number on that side of the Columbia. There's been a number of sightings in the Columbia River Gorge on that highway as well as across the Columbia River, which is a very large river. On the Oregon side, it's a major interstate freeway, I-84. And there's been sightings on both sides of the Columbia River on these highways and freeways over decades. So, but at that location, near that location where my dad's old high school buddy had seen this creature, someone made a big plywood cutout. And so again, we're talking, this is probably right around late 60s, 1970-ish. And I've looked before. My dad took a photo of it. Yeah, I think he used to make slides out of these. I looked several years ago. But they made this big old cutout right at that crossing. So on that highway on the Washington side, there's this 8-foot plywood cutout of a Bigfoot. And it was there for several years. It was really cool. I wish I could find the picture because Dad wanted to take a picture of me one day next to it. I was scared to death to go up next to that thing and get my picture taken next to this Bigfoot cutout. But I just remember it's just this big kind of rudimentary, kind of painted up plywood cutout silhouette where Bigfoot was sighted and crossed the highway on Highway 16, Highway 18 on the Washington side. So that's going back to, just a little bit of that history. Again, it was just kind of a neat little thing. So, but right around that time, my father and I went up to Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams. And it's also, there's a wilderness area called the Indian Heaven Wilderness, big time huckleberry picking. Again, a ton of Bigfoot history from over the years. And over the years, I'm talking over a couple of generations. So, right around, as I'm looking at my dates, right around June of 1971, my dad and I, we were driving around. He had an old a Ford Bronco. We just take it out in the mountains all the time. And he used to run around that country quite a bit. And, he grew up there hunting and fishing and just chasing around, just, getting in trouble. And this one's one of the more significant in my early stages of the interest in Bigfoot. Remember, we went up on an old logging road on a north slope, and we came up to the kind of the top of the clear cut. It was all north slope, and there's snow on the grounds, and that's why it was early enough in the year that we could access all the roads to get up there, but it was also, it was late enough in the year we could do that because the roads were melted out, but it was early enough in the year there's still a big snowbank on that north slope of this ridge or mountain we were on. And we parked the Jeep, or the Bronco, and as we get out, and I'm young, I'm 7-ish years old or something like that, 6, 7, 8. And we get out, and there are these impressions all up and down this slope. And I just going from recollection, it's 200 yards long, maybe 300, just open slope had been logged, and the snow was probably anywhere from inches deep to maybe a foot or two, where there's these huge impressions that went down and up like 3 or 4 times up and down this slope. It wasn't people, they were melted out. And my dad's reminded this me as well, but it was just the location, the size of these melted out impressions in the snow. They were very consistent. I don't remember the stride length or whatever. And again, you talking about deer earlier and their post holing and jumping. A deer didn't jump all the way down the hill and jump back up and jump back down that hill 3 or 4 or 5 times. And these impressions or tracks, which again doesn't make any sense to this day on what made them and why, but they just went up and down this big north slope snowbank 3 or 4 or 5 times, like we call, but it was weird. It was just, they were big melted out impressions in the snow. Someone didn't walk up and down that thing. And if it was a Bigfoot, why he walked up and down that thing, who knows? But it's just something that's always really stuck in my mind.
So what did that do to your thinking in that moment when you were you freaked out, or were you like, I have no idea what's going on?
Great question. So when I was younger, in that age, at 6, 7, 8, and again, Roger Patterson and Gimlin, that film coming out in 67, 68, whatever it was, because they filmed and ran it all over the place. I was terrified of the woods, and I loved going in the outdoors and camping with my dad. So It didn't help. I had a tough time whenever we went out. We had a little tent trailer, occasionally we'd tent camp, whatever. I had a tough time camping in the woods. The daylight, I was fine. Whenever it started getting dark, I just had a tough time sleeping. So that experience there again, that's the only thing I could think of as Bigfoot. So my dad's one of those naysayers, and to this day, he's and I'll get into some stories here a little bit later. Some of the areas that are like the Freeman location, and all that. We spent a lot of time in that country for decades as well. My dad has never seen or experienced anything to even give him an inkling of belief. So even those tracks, we've talked about those in the past. He doesn't know what the heck they were. And obviously at that point he was in his mid 30s, whatever. But no, I can't say I got any more scared, but I just kind of confirmed a little more that I can't sleep at night when I'm camping in the woods. That's kind of what that came to.
Right. Yeah.
It took a long time to get over that too.
Oh, I bet, man. That's funny.
Yeah. So it's a definitive no by any means. But anyway, it's another one of those little memories of personal experience. It's just random, and to this day I really can't explain. Now, how big the snowfield was, I know it would have been right around June of that year of again around 71. So just because of the snow conditions and all that, but it makes no sense to me what made tracks up and down that hill 3 or 4 times. And at this point, we'll never know. But some things make more sense than others. So up in that same country, so my stepbrother, Brian, my parents divorced when I was 3, dad got remarried a couple years later. And so my stepbrother, Brian, they had I can't remember why, but they had some family, I think, or relations up in the Yakima area, which that Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams, and Yakima is where Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin both lived. Bob still does to this day. But he does, yeah. So somewhere right around the early 70s, there's a pass when you're coming from Oregon and having to go cross country. You go through a big Indian reservation. You go over this, it's called Sadis Pass, and it's not real high. It's 3,500 feet, whatever. And drop down the backside to the reservation. You hit a couple of communities to get to Yakima. So, and again, this is just from him. They're driving back in the dark. He's with his father. So this is after mom and his mother and his father had separated and divorced. I think his mom and my dad might have been remarried by then. But they're coming back through that area at night. And I'm just looking at my notes, kind of refresh my memory on it. Late at night, driving back from Yakima to Portland in that Sadis Pass area, and something large crossed the road in front of them, 2 lakes. Wow. And once again, these are areas that aren't random. These are all areas that have a history. And that's all it was. In the dark, young kids with their father, and something on 2 lakes cross the road in the dark in front of them. And that's about all I got on that one.
The best thing about these stories like this is that the people in these stories have nothing to gain by sharing these stories. Like, they're not going to become famous or get tons of money. Like, they're just sharing, hey, this happened to me. And like, there's thousands of these.
Yeah, that's exactly.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And I'll even get a couple of those here. I've got twin brothers that are really good friends, but one can't tell the story to the other because the other one laugh at him. But we'll get to that in a bit. So, and these are my best friends. So, but yeah, and that's it. These stories have been shared with me just over the course of time, and most of them have never been shared beyond me. And so it's just because they're experiences that most of them really they've spent no more time even thinking about them. So just kind of added randomly. Moving forward, up in that same Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams country. So another one. Now, again, I keep mentioning Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams. That's kind of the region I'm working on here. But my grandpa grew up and worked in the coal mines in Pennsylvania back when he was younger. Moved out here, got married to my grandma, started their family. My dad, and then his sister, my aunt. But my grandpa he loved hunting and fishing, and you're talking now probably the 40s, 50s, 60s. And it was a whole different world out here back then as it was, entire country and the entire world. So, but Grandpa Pete loved to get out in the outdoors. And I remember him telling me a story once. And he and I never talked Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever. But he just told me a story that's a little interesting. And he's hunting from that same country. This is back in the early days, just like Bluff Creek in California, when that road was finally being encroached on, taking the bulldozers in, building roads, logging, whatever. And I've heard things about like the different Pigeon National Forest up around Mount St. Helens, that there was a pamphlet put out, and this kind of relates, but pamphlet put out to employees back in the 50s, 60s. If you ever encounter anything you can't explain, do not share it with anyone. Something along those lines. Because these are forests and mountains that were just starting to be, again, encroached on. So not a lot of people, not a lot of roads, not a lot of access, and logging was just starting to happen. So, and there've been fur trappers and miners out here for 100 years prior too. But so my grandpa's out hunting somewhere up in that country, whether it's deer or elk, I don't know, most likely elk. And he the story he told, and he told me this story 30, 40 years ago, but he's hunting and it's heavy timber, very heavily thick forested out here in this part of the West. And he sees a bear. And we have a bunch of bears out here, a ton of black bears, hundreds, tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands. He sees a black bear, there's a little stream crossing with a log on it. So he's watching this bear and he's going to shoot it. And I'm kind of surprised because back in that day, they shot almost anything they could. And as the bears, and I don't know what the distance was, if it was 50 yards, if it was 200 yards, it's heavy enough timber in that country. It wasn't half a mile out. It was reasonably somewhat within range and close. So as he's watching this bear, and if I recall correctly, my grandpa had an old 30-30 that did not have a scope on it, magnification. He's just shooting iron sights, so he's just looking at it eye to eye. So this bear approaches this log, stands up on its hind legs, and walks across the log to go across the creek. And then after that, I had whatever, dropped to all fours, whatever. But that's been thrown out there for years. Oh, you saw a bear or whatever walking on its hind legs. Well, the bears don't tend to walk on hind legs. And if the bear's approaching the log, he's on his all fours walking across. But that's just one story that always stuck with me that Grandpa Pete told me years ago. He wasn't thrown out there, I think, at a Bigfoot sighting. He's just saying it was kind of a weird thing he saw. Bears walking through the woods. He's looking at it, thinking of shooting it. Thing stands up on its hind legs. And you hear stories of a Bigfoot on all fours, typically more in a scurrying type of a manner or whatever. It was just another story. One of all these stories I've got. It's just some for the notes and for the record book. But it doesn't make any sense. And again, he made no reference. He's that old school and worked in the woods a lot growing up. I worked in the mines back in the coal mines and all that. Comes out here and worked for the county parks and spent a lot of time in the woods. He didn't say anything. It might have been a Bigfoot. He just told me a story about bear that stood on his hind legs, walked across the log and across the creek.
It's really weird.
Yeah. And so that's why I threw it out there. It makes no sense to me either, but what in the world? And he didn't make it up.
Yeah, why? I mean, there's no reason he would make that up. Right.
Exactly. So it's just a random story he told, and what even got him onto that topic. And again, this is going back, he's passed away a number of years ago now. So whatever he brought that subject up, I don't even recall, but that was what he had for me. So, and again, up in that same area, this is going back, 45-ish years ago now. And this could have been a bear or whatever, but there's a group of lakes up there, Forlorn. There's actually a bunch of lakes, real popular camping and fishing. Again, this Indian Heaven country, which is between Mount St. Helens and Mount Adams. Neat, beautiful country. A lot of volcanic history and all that. We were up there one evening, my dad, my stepmother, my stepbrother and sister. And we get up kind of on a log landing, another kind of an older clear cut. And I heard a moan in the distance. And now I've heard a lot of bears moan. And they're pretty vocal sometimes as well. And this could have very well been a black bear. But we're up in some of the more active, I guess, or historically active Bigfoot areas. And I went running back my dad because I kind of walked away from where we parked at the end of this trail or at the end of this road and kind of got down to the edge of this log landing. It was late in the evening. It was probably the last half hour of daylight. And again, this is an experience of mine, very anecdotal. I have no idea what it was. It wasn't there were no moose, wasn't an elk or nothing. It's just a moan. And I was a young kid back then, again, very scared of Bigfoot, very into Bigfoot. We heard this moan off in the distance, just kind of a bellowing, echoing moan. And go running back to my dad about 50 yards away. And did you hear that? Then we heard it once again. So again, as I put together my notes, so to speak, of stories and experiences and whatever, this one I just added to. It's just, again, that was a long time ago. I wasn't so wilderness and outdoor savvy back then, but it was just a moan to this day, and knowing what a bear sounds like when they make some of their mating moans, and so bears make a lot of calls. So the only thing I could think of was outside of anything else, could have been a bear moaning in the evening. It's just communication, whatever. But the sound I remember hearing, it wasn't loud. It echoed enough because it was a distance away. It wasn't a scream by any means, just a moan. It heard it twice, and over the hill. And what it was, again, it could have very easily been a bear. But again, my recollection, I don't remember it sounding like what I typically have heard from bears in the forest and the noises they've made over the years. But again, that's all I've got on that. I can't tell you one way or the other what I actually heard. It wasn't a person, it wasn't an elk or a deer or anything else, but can't, So I'm not a guaranteed darn thing. So that being said, a little north of that, the Cascade Mountain Range, which runs from British Columbia, Canada, down and through Oregon, then it does kind of become the Sierra Nevadas as you get into California. The Cascades have a lot of history up and down them, and they're a rugged mountain range for the most part. A lot of volcanoes are on the edge of a tectonic plate. Some friends of ours, Will and Julie, I'll call them, which that is their name. But
yeah.
So,
okay.
And that's as far as we go there, and it doesn't matter.
Right.
And this is just a random thing too. Someone asked, going back just a couple years ago, maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago, someone says, you need to talk to Will about their experience. And it's not like I go out there trolling for information from friends and acquaintances, or wife and I and a lot of friends and family are social, get out about it, but got to talk to Will. So next time we saw Will, in his and Julie's early days, and I don't have a specific time. I would say this is probably in the 90s, roughly. They were up in the, I can't remember exactly what pass. You have a couple major passes in Washington, go from the Seattle-Tacoma area over to Yakima, heading to Spokane and all that. I think it's Snoqualmie Pass, but I can't be 100% sure. But they had a truck and a camper and pulled over at this pass one night. And again, up in this country, even recently, there's a lot of activity. So they're in the camper, and there's a little gap between the truck and the camper. Right? And again, how much? It could have been a couple inches, whatever. In the middle of the night, there's something reaching between their camper and the cab of the truck pickup. It's rummaging around in there, and they could tell by how far it's reaching in. It was reaching in a long ways between the cab of the pickup and the camper, and woke them both up. And I wonder what the heck, who's screwing around with this, but it was just kind of ominous and eerie enough for them that they just kind of held tight. And again, I'm kind of filling in the blanks here. I can't recall all the exact details. So in the morning, Will goes out there and he finds long red hairs, and he said they're long and they stunk. Really? And he's told me, he says, I've got them in an envelope somewhere. I don't remember where they're at, and I want to go find. I got to go dig them out sometime. But just long red hairs, something digging in there between the camper and the cab of the truck, and long hair, stinky red hairs as a result of it. So, but that being said, just that story alone made him a believer. And I didn't talk with his wife Julie at the time. They're no longer together. Not that matters, but anyway, just another one of those little story things that just kind of randomly, hey, you got to talk to Will about this story, and that's his story. And all of a sudden, he's a believer in Bigfoot. So
that one is really interesting. Yeah. Man, you said he held on to him, or
yeah, he's got hairs in an envelope somewhere. I had this conversation with him. It was a couple years ago now. I meant 4, 5, 6 years ago. I can't recall. And we're friends or acquaintances. It's not like we hang out buddy. I haven't seen or talked to him in probably a year or two. But I had told him, I said, go find that dang envelope. But whether he ever has or not, and he's got his trials and tribulations of life, just like all of us, I guess. So it's again one of those people that probably had just that one particular experience and encounter, and we'll never forget it. But move on with life as well.
But if Will does happen to find the envelope with the hair, there is a rock and Bigfoot DNA study that's happening down in North Carolina State.
Really?
Okay. I believe it's North Carolina State. and they are taking all sorts of evidence. It was announced today at a Smoky Mountain Bigfoot conference.
Well, I'll message you. Yeah. That's interesting. That's hey, Will, ever come across that envelope? But yeah, I'm kind of curious as well. It's So anyway, like I said, that's the extent of that story. But still, it's intriguing. Again, moving on. So I mentioned earlier my stepbrother Brian, who had him and his dad and I think and sister with something across the road between Yakima and Portland years ago, whatever. But his older son, and I forgot about this one, and he just threw this at me randomly several years ago as well. But his friends' parents think they hit one with their car. And I don't exactly what or where or whatever, I don't know. And again, it's just a random conversation that my nephew and I had several years ago, but they live up in they're all up in this kind of the Seattle metropolitan area for the most part. But my friends' parents think they hit one with a car once.
That's that's like a huge statement to throw out. Like, I mean, I would love to try to talk to him. Like, that's wild.
And who his friend? How much I question him on it? It's not like I'm trying to get all the details, and I got to go there tomorrow and review the location, even if it was 25 years old or whatever. I can't remember. I really honestly don't even remember that conversation outside of I've just kept these notes over the years, and all of a sudden Matt came up. So that topic. So, who the friend was, where it happened, how long ago it happened, I don't know. I mean, after all this, after we have this follow up with any details you want me to try and gather and glean for you, I'll do what I can. Can't guarantee a darn thing, but who knows? Maybe I can get all the Creighton's buddies, friends, or parents, and you can talk with them.
I feel like if you're gonna say, yeah, we're pretty sure we hit a Bigfoot with our car, you probably have more details. Like, that's not just a short sentence that you'd throw out without having more stuff to back.
Right,
and that's interesting.
Yeah.
But.
So whether the Creighton's friend was with the parents and he was there when it happened, and then the friend said, "Hey, Creighton, I think we hit a Bigfoot last night," and then Creighton years later tells me, Uncle Rick, that my friend's parents think they hit a Bigfoot. And so I don't know how deathless it. They didn't make it up. The Creighton's friend didn't make that up to him, but. Again, that's all I've got for you at the moment.
Wild.
Then finally, as far as the Mount St. Helens country goes, Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams, there's another gentleman that's prominent, but it really stays below the radar here. A gentleman by the name of Joe Beelart.
I was like, he's going to say Beelart. He totally is, because Oregon Bigfoot Highway is such a good book.
Yeah. I actually haven't seen it yet. I want to get it, and Cliff. No, I know a couple places can get it, but I want Joe to sign it for me.
Yeah, you got
personally, as opposed because I think Cliff has them signed by Joe, but I don't want to get one signed anonymously. I want to hold Joe's hand when he signs the dang thing for me. So anyway, that being said, I haven't seen it, but so years ago, and heck, I'm looking now. Heck, this is back in 2006, I guess. So 17 years ago. Doesn't seem that long. But I've been in communication with Joe and Cliff back then, and I'm not buddy with these guys, just random emails back in the days. I've met them both on a couple different occasions over the years. But yeah, back in 2006, and it's probably the winter of 2005, early 2006, I was emailing with Joe. Might have been before even Facebook, because we're friends on Facebook too. But Joe goes, "Hey," says, "how'd you like to be involved in a camp out?" And this is a Skookum cast. You're familiar with Skookum cast? And yeah. So, and how many listeners are right now? I don't know, but hopefully
tons.
Yeah,
tons.
So, and this is right after. So Skookum cast must have been 04, 05, maybe. I don't remember the exact year, but it was prior to this. So, because I've dated here of June of 06, but because that's when I was up there, or we were up there. So the previous winter, Joe's, "Hey, how'd you like to be part of a Bigfoot camp?" And I said, "Oh, cool. Well, give me your address." So a couple days later, I get this mailing. It is a pamphlet. It's an envelope about an inch thick. I go, "What the heck did Joe Beelart send us?" And this was like a disclaimer. It was on and on and on. And what they're trying to do is kind of create some kind of a habituation up near Skookum Meadows for the summer. And they wanted people to occupy the specific camp spot throughout all summer long. And in different groups, if you can commit 2 days, 3 days, a whole week, a whole month, whatever, but they just wanted to have a continual occupation of this campsite. So once I started reading this documentation, we had 2 young boys then and a young chocolate lab. And I was reading, I said, "Oh crap! They want us to go up there. They want us to go up there alone." So that would be a big shindig of 5, 10, 15, 20 Bigfoot enthusiasts. "Oh no, we got to go up to Skookum Meadows and camp out by ourselves." "Oh crap, honey!" So we ended up doing it, and had a great time. And actually, I mentioned I've got some photos, some things there. But there's another gentleman. Do you know Rick Knoll? Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, dude. Well, I don't. I've never met Rick Knoll, but I know how he's involved with things. Right. Yeah, totally.
So we go to Skookum Meadows, like I said, and this would have been in the winter that we were making these arrangements to participate. So we picked like a 4 or 5 day window. I can't remember how long we were up there. Took our trailer up and had the specific spot to go camp and all that. Gated road behind, had my mountain bike, had the young lab, chocolate lab, had my boys who were 17 years ago, so like 7 and 5, I guess. And we fiddle-farted around for a couple days. Went out, did some wood knocking and all that. And but right up behind our camp, up a logging road, because there's a lot of old logging history up there. And right up behind camp, you go 100, 200 yards up, it's gated, and probably 100 yards from camp on the road, off the main forest road that we camped. There's this very rough copy of a sign there with a rough sketching of a Bigfoot, I guess you want to call it. And I can't share with you now, but it's something that I've got it right here. Historical Bigfoot activity zone, and underlined in bold letters, "Be aware." So awesome. I go riding up behind camp, and all of a sudden there's a sign there. And she decided to go get my wife and get the kids come up, and I took a picture and all. This is really pretty cool. So I knew we were camping in the right spot anyway. So I think our last morning, there was a road that kind of continued to the east from where we camped. And took the young lab out. Had to go. We went out early in the morning. Everyone's still crashed out, and we probably went about 2 miles up this. It's a good gravel road. It goes right up along Skookum Meadows. I go 1.5 miles, 2 miles. It's gated. It's a seasonal gate. It can open and close. So a dog and I go up there. Then we got up to a side road, and I love exploring. Again, there's a lot of elk sign up in there. I just always thinking of hunting. I don't love to kill, but I love to hunt and pursue and be out there. So we took this little side gravel road and went up there a little ways, 1/2 mile or so. And it's getting to the point where we're about ready to turn around. The pup, she's 5, 6, 7 months old, just full of pea and vinegar and energetic and bouncing all over. And so we've been gone an hour or so, hour and a half, and go up this side gravel road. It's all flat. It's just kind of a high valley, Skookum Meadows there, meadows and swampy stuff all around. And we go up the side road, and there's a little cut bank on the right hand side of the road. As we're wandering through there, I look up on it and I go, "You've got to be crapping." I didn't say crapping, but you got to be crapping. And up on the side hill, this cut bank, maybe 5 or 6 feet tall. There was this impression. You couldn't see the heel side of it so much, but the upper front part, there's an impression 7, 8 inches wide with toe indentations on it. One flat impression walking this cut bank going up. And I go, "You got it." So had my phone with me. I think it was a phone, might have been who knows, it could have been a digital camera, probably was a digital camera. Put my foot next to it, took a couple pictures and all. And my young lab, she's bouncing all over the place. I'm getting a little ticked. I didn't bring a leash for her because we're out in the middle of nowhere, didn't need a leash. She didn't get more than 10, 20 feet from me, but she's just jumping all over, up and down my legs. And I'm scared to death she's going to jump on this. And this impression was, it was like it was on a wet substrate, or wet kind of a hill, and it now is bone dry. It's probably in late June, and it was pretty. It was not a fresh impression. It had been there for a while, but it was soft enough that this impression had been made there with that looked like, you can count 5 toes on it. You can just see the forefront of it again. That just kind of the way the impression was. The backside didn't leave a whole lot, and I said, "You got to be kidding me." This looks like a dang Bigfoot track walking up this embankment, one step, and then up on top of the cut bank. And dog's bouncing all over. I'm trying to take a picture, and she's jumping around because all she wants to do is love and play and jump on you. So I took a few pictures with my foot next to it. Then we bailed out of there and made our 2.5 mile track back to camp. told my wife about it, and I had some casting material, but it was just far enough away. And I questioned it. There were some things about the track I wondered about, and I just went on. So got back home that night, the following day, emailed Joe Bielart, sent him a picture. He goes, holy crap. Says, and I had heard of Rick Knoll's name. I'd never met him before and hadn't heard a whole lot. He's one of those guys, again, kind of under the radar. So we made arrangements 2 weeks later to meet Rick Knoll up there. And this in the middle of the Gifford Pinchot National Forest. It's actually, I mean, of all the time we'd spent up there, we'd seen like 2 vehicles and 4 or 5 days of camping up there. It doesn't get a whole lot of traffic. So wife and I went up there like on a Thursday or Friday and met Rick up there and walked in there. Well, there'd been some thunderstorms. So it's not summer thunderstorms up there. And I told him I was a little concerned. Now he's come from the Seattle area and he didn't seem to be as concerned. I said, man, I know we get some pretty good thunderstorms and some pretty good showers out of them. He didn't think it'd be an issue. Well, we make the stroll back up in that area. And again, it's roughly an hour walk. It's all, like I said, it's all good gravel forest road. It's just gated. And as we got back up in there, in addition to that, there's a lot of growth there. Some of the mountain lupin, which is a cool flowering plant, some other stuff. Mm-hmm. So as we got to that cut bank, I can swear this where it was. And you can maybe see a little impression, a little definition where I thought this might have been it. And Rick was up there. He's walking around. He walked up on the cut bank and looked back in there and all that. And he is telling us all his stuff and telling us about some of the different tracking methods that are kind of cutting edge back then. Some different things they're playing with, whatever. And but again, it's just that what I saw the 2 weeks previous when I was there, we just could not find it. Well, I took pictures of what I thought was it, and as I came back home, compared the pictures, yeah, we were at the exact same location where that impression was, just the rain from 2 weeks earlier. And again, one of the little plants there, a little lupin, it went from this to like 5 or 6 inches back up. So it was the same exact plant they'd grown. It was the same thing. It's just the thunderstorms, the summer thunderstorms, had just come at, who knows, you can get a half inch or two of rain in a short period of time when that happens. So we were right there. Just there was nothing for him to really see outside of the photos I'd taken a few weeks ago. But I said Joe Bielart wasn't excited enough to send Rick Knoll up there to meet with it. But just summer thunderstorms kind of ruined it. And exactly what it was, I don't know. I'll send you the pictures sometime. But it's
that would be awesome. And you have pictures of the sign too.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be so cool. So was this after? So this would have been after. Okay, the Skookum cast was cast in September of 2000. Okay, so this is like a few years after that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I knew it was after. I just a couple, but 6 years isn't that far. But
yeah, it's not too bad. Yeah. That's such an interesting story, Rick. Like, way to.
So anyway, so I had to jump the Joe Bielart name.
That's awesome, dude. That's an amazing talk about being involved with Rick Knoll, and that's for Bigfoot history. That's really cool.
Yeah, he didn't seem to be too terribly impressed with it all. But the fact that he just kind of missed the boat by 2 weeks. And again, I don't know what I found there, but yeah, when you see the pictures, you might.
How close to were you aware of where the site of the actual Skookum cast was?
Sure. I think we were in less than a mile. I think it was the road slightly to the south of where we were camped that we would have driven by. We were real close. I mean, we were camped right next to Skookum Meadows. So where that cast was made was not in Skookum Meadows. It's on off the side of the road nearby. Mm-hmm. But I'm thinking where we were camped. It was all triangulation wise. All real close.
That's amazing. That's such a cool story.
Yeah, it was just kind of like I said. It's Joe Bielart connects, and all said, okay, that's cool. We're in with Joe Bielart. Then he says this thing, and we got to camp by ourselves. We're not part of a big camping crew. But anyway, okay, great, whatever. But we survived.
There you go.
And I may have found a track. So I've got plenty more. Are you still with me?
I'm still with you, dude. I mean, dude, I've been doing this for 5 years. I'm still with you.
So I'm going to switch regions now.
All right.
This goes to the Northeast Oregon, Southwest or Southeast Washington, the Wenaha, Tucannon Wilderness area. This is Paul Freeman country.
Yeah, dude.
And the Mill Creek Watershed. And again, I'll go as chronologically as I can with this. Most of this, pretty much. So first of all, the Mill Creek Watershed is the watershed for the city of Walla Walla. And Paul Freeman, they've patrolled it for decades to keep people out of the Mill Creek watershed and to water purity and whatever. And Walla Walla is not a huge town by any means. It's grown tremendously in the last generation or so, but they just protected it like crazy. Yeah. And Paul Freeman was they have watershed patrollers. So it's closed to public entry. The watershed is, and it's a hole. It's they give out elk tags in the straddles Oregon Washington border. They give it elk tags, which are very highly coveted elk tags because they just give out a few. So the elk the bulls in there grow big, mature because they're lightly hunted. No one's in there bugging them all year. You have like 5 or 7 days out of the year that they have these hunts in there, and they're very difficult tags to get. They just allow a handful of hunters in there, so it's just a coveted tag. People sneak in to poach because these big mature bull elk hang out in there, and so they've got these patrol riders that spot and scopes. They ride horses through the watershed. They patrol the boundary. That's just big rugged country. You get along the upper perimeter of this, the canyon drops off like that. It's 60, 70. I've always joked you don't want to drop your bowling ball out here because you'll never get it back. Right. And these canyons drop 2,000 or 3,000 feet deep. It's just big, beautiful country. And obviously what an ideal area for anything to live and not be bothered. So Paul Freeman was a watershed patroller, a Forest Service employee, watershed patroller. And this is where he had the sighting while he was employed by the Forest Service. See, he may not have been on duty that day. I don't recall exactly, or the couple times he's had encounters or sightings, whatever. But I fortunately, I got to grow up. So where the watershed is on the across the road from there is this big wilderness area. It's one of the first wilderness areas in Oregon, the Winnehaha-Tucannon Wilderness. Once again, no roads. It's open to public entry, but it's by trail only. You can't take bikes in there. You can't take a chainsaw. You can hike it or ride by bikes. And again, very rugged country, just beautiful, awesome country. And there's just a bunch of history up there, Bigfoot. So, and I was fortunate because that's where my dad was hunting back in the days. He had applied for that Mill Creek Watershed tag, and about every 10, 12 years, you get the tag to hunt in the Mill Creek Watershed. And my uncle had horses, and if they weren't hunting in this watershed, they were hunting over in the wilderness on horses. They pack in 8 or 10 miles in the middle of the wilderness. And said I was just fortunate being back in my early days of hunting. I got to go hunt in this very remote, pristine country in Northeast Oregon. So some friends of my grandparents, Gene and Zola Howard, and again, this is going back decades. The watershed rider back, and I'm looking, this must have been in the 70s, is a guy by the name of Red. And then this is kind of a secondhand story from this Gene and Zola that they told my dad when he was younger than my dad told me. But sure. Gene being the hunter, I think Zola hunted. But they knew Red, the watershed rider from Mill Creek Watershed. And this Red told, this is kind of verbatim, I guess, more or less. But this Red told Gene more or less, he goes, what is it? He says, he lives there. This is in the Mill Creek Watershed, talking about Bigfoot. He lives there. We know each other. Says, I don't bother him. He doesn't bother me. Wow. So that's coming from the 70s, Mill Creek Watershed. Now, that being said, sightings up there, Mill Creek Watershed, they can climb up out of the watershed and cross the road and be into these other wilderness areas, big remote canyons and whatever. And that's where there's been sightings back and forth over the years. Again, the watershed is not open to public entry. So unless you're a watershed patrol rider, you're accessing almost year round outside of the deep snow winter months. So anyway, yeah, that was what Red had to say.
What happened to Red to make him say that? Like that's
yeah.
Can you imagine? Like
and this Gene and Zola, and again, Gene and Zola were my grandparents' friends that lived up outside of Washougal, Washington.
Yeah.
And Gene, I think, was more the hunter. He hunted with my grandfather. So yeah, what caused or created that conversation back in the 70s between Gene and Red, the watershed rider? I have no idea. Because I'm going to throw a couple other stories at you of our encounters and experiences and talking and conversations with these most recent watershed patrollers.
Oh, okay.
Who will totally negate anything you have to say about it, but we'll get to those. So that's why it was a good thing we're kind of doing this region by region. So anyway, that was what Red had to say. We know each other. I don't bother him. He doesn't bother me. Later on, in 1979, roughly, October 79, which would have made me 15. And so my uncle had horses. Him and my father were hunting partners, hunting buddies. So we'd drive into this remote little campground on the edge of the wilderness. Then we'd take horses in, roughly 8 to 10 miles, high ridges. Again, just neat country. Very few people back there. You had a wilderness area, but I would say to yourself, because elk hunting was pretty popular back then. Anyone could get a tag, but still, it was just kind of a unique kind of experience. And here I am, a teenager, getting the opportunity to go back in there. So there's a canyon back in there, and I hesitate to name it, so I won't, because I have another story that kind of follow along. But as you get back in the wilderness, one of the canyons, we get back in there on this long ridge, and you had some canyons, and these canyons are holes. Again, you don't want to drop your bowling ball back there. But my father and I hunted down in the bottom of this one canyon one day. And as we were, and you don't go in the bottom of these canyons unless you really gotta. Because once you get in the bottom, you have to get your butt out back to camp.
Right.
It's not forgiving country. It's beautiful. And I was a young kid back then. I'd love to go out there these days, just to see it from my perspective and age now, because I haven't been in there in probably 30 plus years. But anyway, this particular canyon, we get in the bottom of it, and again, we're elk hunting. And as we're working up the bottom, there's game trails and stuff. And we're working up the bottom, and all of a sudden we get to an area, and it's getting to mid-afternoon, whatever. Weather's really nice this is late October too, when the elk seasons are. In the bottom, and all of a sudden we get to a spot where we're going to start climbing back out of the canyon. And I'm talking a good hour hike, and probably closer to 2, because it's just a nonstop grind climbing up out of there. And we get to a point at the bottom where all of a sudden all the game sign, elk sign in particular, but there's all kinds of other stuff in there too, but all of a sudden it's just, the trails just kind of, even though there's trails in there, there's just like no sign, and it became just dead quiet. And I remember to this day, and my dad made the same comment back then, it was just an eerie, and again, you're in the bottom of a canyon where the walls on both sides are going up. Where at the bottom of this canyon, it just became just an eerie feel down there. And again, this will play into another story here in a bit. And Dad made no birds, it just no life. It was just kind of an eerie, dead, quiet, silent canyon bottom. And then we proceeded to climb out, and that was it. But I just remember that because it was just I've never been so tuned in to know, I think that something's watching me or whatever, and whether it's my wife or a Bigfoot or a cougar or whatever, I've never had those senses, I don't think. But we're in the bottom there, and it was just weird. It was just a weird, dead, calm, silent canyon bottom. So we climbed out of there, and that said that's really kind of the end of that. So a year later, we're back out in that same country, again, the end of October. This has been roughly, I think, 1980. And this canyon is probably 4, 5, 6 miles long, and it's just kind of from the headwaters where the drainage starts, it just kind of works its way down to the Winona River. But we were up at the upper end of the drainage on a pack trail. And we're hiking out one day, and we got to the head, and we had a breeze kind of coming up that drainage, and we had a section there where we had like an ungodly smell. And it was midday, the thermals and all that, the air is starting to get warming up and rising. But as it's working its way up that drainage, we're going through a little patch of timber, some open hillsides, and we got to a section there where it was just a deathly stinking stench. There's elk hunters in there. Someone could have killed an elk down in that little patch of timber below us, a couple 100 yards, and a couple days later, the guts and whatever might have been getting rotten, and it might have been just working its way up with that afternoon breeze or whatever. I don't know, but I've just always remembered that stench coming out of the same canyon that we had this little eerie experience down deeper the previous year. So what it was we smelled, I don't know. The thing is, as we walked, we went through about a 50-yard, maybe 100-yard section of this trail, and all of a sudden we're out of so we were within the cone of whatever is called the cause of this odor. We kind of went through the cone and walked through it within a minute or two, and then you're out of it. But it was just kind of stomach curdling, the smell. It very easily could have been an elk that someone had harvested down there and cleaned, and then we were just smelling what left, because body parts I don't think smell real good if they've been sitting out in the sun or aging for a couple of years, especially if they're outside of your body. So yeah, just the stench, the strong smell at the head of that canyon. Roughly 10 years later, we're hunting in the same general area in the wilderness, and my dad heard tree knocking. We'd split up. He was on a side canyon. So this is roughly October, again, elk season of 1990. And it's just a continual, he and I are separated by a mile. I think I'd made a hunt around into another canyon, working my way back up to where I'd meet him. And he's on this little side canyon, kind of a brushy little timbered canyon. Again, it's all wilderness area. And I heard chopping. He said, it sounded like someone cutting wood. Just continual chop, chop, chop. And it was off and on. It was kind of, I don't remember if there was a cadence to it or whatever. And, but it was a wood knocking type of sound. And it wasn't an area there was anyone camped or cutting firewood. And I think right before I got to my dad, as he was working his way kind of up into this drainage, this timber drainage, he saw a bull elk down there, kind of coming from the same area where the shopping sound was coming from. But elk, when they do bang trees with their antlers, especially any bulls do. They knock the velvet off late in the summer, during the rut when they're in the mating season in September, early October. They will rake trees and all that, but they don't chop. They don't chop. They scrape and rattle their antlers like crazy. So this chopping went on for quite a while. Whenever you hear about wood knocking, you don't hear about a repetitive knocking for an hour or so. So it's just, he heard wood knocking that lasted like off and on for an hour. And that we not too cannibal was. Again, what the answer was, could have been that bull elk, but that doesn't make a lot of sense. That's not typically the kind of knocking they do with their antlers on wood. But again, coming all out of that same country, and smells and feelings and sensations, and then wood knocking.
That's very weird.
Yeah.
All of that same area over 10 years.
Yeah. Well, and for decades prior to, and obviously decades after, there's been, sightings and stories, encounters coming out of there. So I just, again, these are pieces of the puzzle. I don't have a specific answer for any of them. But I do have actually a little better answer that plays into all that. So it was right around, it might have been that same year, it might have been a year after, we were hunting deer in Southeast Oregon. I see my picture glomming in now that you're seeing on that side. It's not that big a deal. There's a highly coveted deer tag in Southeast Oregon called the Trout Creek Mountains. Rifle deer tag takes about 12 to 15 years to get. It's all high desert. It's 5, 6, 7, 8,000 foot desert country, aspens and all that stuff, not Bigfoot country, even though it's near the Jar Bridge in Nevada, which has some history as well. But the thing is, it was an ironic meeting. Again, this is right around the same time. So Dad and I are down there hunting. Again, it was around 89, 90, 91. Again, it would probably been early October, where elk seasons are late October. The deer seasons are typically like the first week of October. And we're driving around. It gets to be midday. It's getting pretty hot out. We pull over, and all of a sudden, I can't remember if this rig was parked there, and we drove up on them, or we were parked there and they drove on us. And all of a sudden, here pops out these two good old boys. And I'm talking, we're talking 33 years ago. We're out. A couple good old boys. Well, we started talking with them, and they live up in the Pendleton, Milton Freewater area, which is right up there on the edge of the Blue Mountains, which is the Mill Creek Watershed. We hunt to Canada Wilderness. So we start chit-chatting with them and find out they're cattle, they're ranchers. I don't remember if they're cattle ranchers or wheat ranchers or what. So they start talking about that country up there, and they hunt up in that country. My dad goes, and as they're saying the story, I go, hell, So my dad pipes in, goes, well, that's where he hunts and been hunting up there for 30 years in the wilderness. So I remember this one almost verbatim as well. So all of a sudden, one of those cowboys, and these guys, so 33 years ago, my dad would have been in his mid-50s. These guys are probably in their 70-ish. And all of a sudden, one of the guys kind of stops and kind of tilts his head and asks my dad, you ever see anything in there? And so my dad caught me off guard, this old cowboy saying this, and we're out in the high desert of Southeast Oregon. We're 200 miles from Bigfoot country. And he just kind of stepped forward. You ever see anything in there weird or something? And my dad kind of takes a second and goes, you mean Bigfoot? And again, my dad's not a believer by any means, but just how he even responded that way, I expect he probably would, especially with a question like that being asked you. And so the guy goes on to tell us, and they know Paul Freeman, both these ranchers. He's done some work with the ranches over the years. He's just kind of a big old easygoing, happy-go-lucky guy. And said that they had been approached back in those days by some researchers of some sort. I don't remember specific. I mean, they were Bigfoot research, but what their credentials were, I don't recall. But so I can't remember both the cowboys or one of them had, but they had they'd been in touch with these cowboys, or this cowboy/cowboys, wanted them to take these researchers into the Wenaha-Tucannon Wilderness. So one of the cowboys did take him in and took him into the canyon I was referring to earlier, where I had this weird eerie sensation, my dad and I, where we heard or smelled the stench the year later. They took these researcher guys into the bottom of that canyon, coincidentally. And then I remember this is the word for word thing. The cowboy looks at my dad and says, "As sure as I'm standing here, that thing exists."
Wow.
So this is just, like I said, some 70-year-old cowboy dude from the Blue Mountains that we meet in the high desert of Oregon that has taken researchers into the bottom of this canyon in the wilderness. And this, as sure as I'm standing here, that thing exists. So probably one of the more interesting stories I've got. They said they found tracks that looked like a family of three, a large track, a smaller track, and then a small one. They said it looked like the small one and the big one got into a major battle. Ground torn to heck, just rototilled. But I also remember the cowboy saying there was poop, feces there. And he goes, for some reason, those researchers didn't take a sample.
Man, this is crazy, Rick, because I'm like, this is where I know someone in the comments is going to be like, come on, Jeremiah, that was totally this researcher and this researcher. Put it in the comments so I can know.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I'm talking, this is right around 1990. So we're talking obviously a while back. And when that experience or encounter happened where this cowboy took these researchers in to the Wenaha-Tucannon Wilderness and went in the bottom of the canyon, I don't know how far previously. And I can't remember when let me see, Paul Freeman had his sighting or his first encounter, at least like in 83-ish, I think.
Yeah, well, it was June 82.
Okay.
Near Walla Walla. Yeah, so pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I'll get to that too, because I've camped at T-Dutch Springs many a time. So, but anyway, like I said, this is just this random encounter. We meet a couple of old codger cowboys out in the high desert, and it ends up, as sure as I stand here, that thing exists.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So, wow. Word for word, I remember that vividly. So now who the guys were, and then the conversation swayed from there, and then they had deer tags that took them 10, 12, 15 years to get. We had deer tags that took us equally as long. And then, hey, guys, best of luck. And that was basically the end of our conversation and meeting. So
that's incredible.
Yeah. So fast forward. I had a special elk tag up in that country a couple times now, probably 10 years ago, 11 years ago. And we met a couple that live up Mill Creek. So you have the Mill Creek Watershed where it comes out of the watershed area that's close to public entry. It drains, it runs 15 miles till it hits the Walla Walla River near the town of Walla Walla. I think it hits the Walla Walla River. It could be Tusha River too. But Mill Creek, as it comes out of, as you leave the town of Walla Walla, you start heading up into the foothills of the Blue Mountains. It goes along the Washington side, then it kind of winds up into, or winds down into Oregon, then curls back up into the watershed. And we met a couple. I won't go into all the details how we met them, but that lived right on Mill Creek, probably within 5 miles of the watershed. And they live right on the creek. We had mutual friends that were so random, it was kind of silly. And we're sitting on this cool little creek in early fall 10 years ago, eating watermelon, had a beer or two, and the topic of Bigfoot comes up because he's a dirt bike rider. He's got buddies that dirt bike, and they ride their quads all around on the roads between the watershed and the wilderness. Wendy, yeah, Mark and Wendy. So one evening we're down at their house along Mill Creek, and it's a warm evening, and like I said, it's probably early to mid September now, so it's not too late in the year, but nights are getting cold, the days are warm still, and the topic of Bigfoot comes up, and Mark, who owned a local motorcycle dealership in Walla Walla, and his wife, silly and goofy, neat gal. He's not a believer. She's a believer. Now, again, we're talking this roughly 10 years ago. So Mark is not a believer, but he told us a story, and they've got a couple acres. The gravel road that goes up Mill Creek and takes you up into the forest. Splits their property. So their house is on one side, along the creek side. Then across the property, they've got an acre or two. He's got some big boulders and some humps. He rides his dirt bikes and does all kinds of crazy stuff there. So he said a number of years earlier, and I can't remember how many years earlier, they were out there one evening, early 2000s, And it's kind of brushy and timbery. And as you get up across the creek, across the property, it starts, the hill climbs up. This probably goes 1,000, 1,500 feet up. It's all south facing slope and it's low enough elevation. It's all pretty much open, grassy hillside for the most part. You get the sun hits it. It's hot and dry in that part of the state, especially during the summers. And there's little brushy drainages and draws that come down. But down along the lower part, there's quite a bit of timber. So again, this is Mark, the husband, who's not a believer. He says in the evening, and again, I don't have a ton of specifics on it. Again, roughly early 2000s, a deer came running down off the hill through the trees and comes flying right by them. And he runs across their property, and they look up in the trees where the deer came from, and which is just to the north. They caught a glimpse of what looked like a chimpanzee. And that's, again, as I'm looking now, it says he's not a believer, but to this day, he questions what they saw. And I can't remember if wife Wendy saw the same thing or not. But I said, wife Wendy's a believer. He's not, but he told me that one story. This deer comes flying across. And there's a lot of deer down there. There's a lot of white-tailed deer in the lower elevations. You got mule deer up higher. Most likely it's a whitetail, who knows? But the thing came just flying across. And they look up where it came from, and it looks like a chimpanzee on the timber. Small.
So that is really weird.
And he's not a believer, but he saw a chimpanzee.
Wow, Rick, I don't know.
A couple more, then I'm going to move on to local stuff. You still with me?
I'm still here. I'm here, man.
I'm mesmerized. I like sharing this stuff. It's pretty cool.
This is the stuff you can't find in books, and this is the stuff I love.
Yeah.
I don't think you can find it in books, right, Rick?
Oh, no.
No, definitely not.
Only big book. Only book I've written is called an Excel spreadsheet.
Hey, there you go.
With stuff. So up in that same country, this is a personal experience. There's a cool little lake up there called Jubilee Lake. And we went camping up there. This is 2008, so July 5th, 2008. And my wife actually came across some pictures we were looking at today. So I keep saying our boys, 16, 15 years ago. So 9 years old and 7 roughly. We went out one morning, we had 22 rifles and went out just target shooting. I mean, they're getting young. I want them to get every little experience you can of being in the outdoors and go and shoot a 22. It's kind of a rite of passage. So we went south of Jubilee Lake, a couple miles. And again, this whole area up there from Jubilee to Deduct and the whole Blue Mountains has a ton of history. We go out and there's a place, I can't remember, it's called Big Sink or something like that. A couple drainages and creeks that come off and they kind of head off the backside of the Blue Mountains, the east side of the Blue Mountains heading towards the town of Elgin. So kind of in that general area. Again, how many people even know where that's at or been there? I don't know. But we go out mid-morning, 11-ish or so, and go out just to plink 22s for a half hour or so and leave mom at camp and so she can babysit the dog. I don't know if the dog went with us or not. So we go out main gravel roads south of Jubilee Lake, head to the east a little bit, a mile or two, and found a little logging road that was closed off. We drove like 50 yards down. It's gated off, which is fine. And I can't remember. We put some targets out there. So behind us to the north is a big timbered patch that hasn't been logged and sizable. Little creek drainage coming through. And again, this is even though it's something I experienced or we experienced, it's very anecdotal. I have no idea. So we go out there and start shooting the 22s, plink, plink, plink. Boys didn't know anything. And there's, again, the heat of the day starting to warm up, a little high mountain breeze, and there's squirrels and chipmunks, and there's birds flying around. But after I heard the first one, it caught my attention. I didn't at first, but my dog's getting all excited outside. And now there's birds that can make a whooping noise. Mm-hmm. Don't know exactly what birds they are. Again, they said that this started when we started plinking the 22s, and it was way off to the north, hundreds of yards away, coming from that big patch of timber. And then I got a second series of 3 or 4 whoops, and again mid-morning, 10ish, 11 o'clock or whatever. So again, I heard whoops, and the boys, whether they heard them or not, I can't remember if I even pointed them out. Then I think I heard 2 series of 3 to 4 whoops each, and that was it. But for the archives, I just made note of it. I heard whoops. It could have been a bird, and it could not have been. No, not saying what it was or what it wasn't, but up in that part of the world, you just have to. I just document it, make notes, and move on. So, Mill Creek Watershed, which again is closed to public entry for all but like 7 days out of the year for elk hunters, outside of the wilderness riders. They're the wilderness patrol. I kill it though, yeah. So, back in 1996, my father and I had the elk tag for the Mill Creek Watershed. And again, this is a really highly coveted tag. It takes 10, 12, 15 years to get the darn thing. And watershed rider gal then, her name was Rowena. And she had worked for outfitters and guides for most of her life. So she was a horse gal. She was an outdoorsy. She guided. She camp cooked. She did all kinds of stuff. And she was, if I was going to get lost in the woods or needed to be defending the woods, this is the gal I wanted to be there. She was the rough and tumble gal, didn't take crap. And her and my father got along great. They just chit chatted. We talked with her a couple times. And I just remember my dad bringing up the topic because my dad's always been interested in the topic of Bigfoot. He's not, not a believer by any means. Not to say he's doesn't believe, but he doesn't really believe. But he brought up the topic. My dad will bring up a million topics during the conversation, but he brought it up with the Rowena. And again, I think I'm going back to about 1996. And she just, and she's, because there's a couple pack trails that go up through the wilderness, through that watershed. Again, there's no public access or entry outside of the 1 week out of the year.
Sure.
And over the course of time, a lot of those trails, there's 3 or 4 of them that go up a couple of creek bottoms and then up on the ridges. And this is what Rowena and the other watershed patrollers have used over the years, just riding through the watershed. But for all intents and purposes, they should never encounter anyone there. And that's their main purpose, is to keep people out of the watershed. So they typically patrol the perimeter of the watershed as opposed to the heart of it. But she'd ride those trails. She loved riding horses, so she'd ride those trails often enough. But there's no real maintenance up there. And the winters are rough and brutal, and just the nature of the mountains. Trees fall down, downfalls, brush grows up and all that. So some of those trees have slowly just disappeared over time. So I think she just had a couple trails she did like to ride. And then the rest of the time is just driving vehicles up around the perimeter, the higher elevations, and just making sure making sure people just aren't sneaking in the watershed for whatever purpose or reason. But anyway, my dad did bring up the topic with her, and she was adamant. Now, and going back to my conversation or my story earlier about Red, the patrol rider back in the 70s, we know each other, and I don't bother him. He doesn't bother me. So Rowena says that and she'd been patrolling at that point in 96. She'd been patrolling. I think she was down to her last year or two prior to retirement at that point. But she'd been patrolling for 15, 16, 17 years. I've never seen anything. That was her story. So now there's a Hispanic gentleman. I can't remember his name. I've talked with him a couple times. And actually encountered him last year in end of August. Big guy. He takes his job extremely seriously because he is a Forest Service employee. And some of the roads around there, you can't have ATVs, side-by-sides, dirt bikes unless they're street legal and licensed. And he enforces that law to the T. So he doesn't only enforce the law of keeping people out of the watershed, he does actually patrol some of the adjacent forest roads up there. You get a lot of people up there. There's some dirt bike trails that are real popular, but you can only stay on those trails. So anyway, I said I ran into him last year. We chit-chatted about previously, about 8 years earlier, we had another elk tag up there. My wife and father and I, maybe the kids were with us, I can't recall. I met the gentleman. I can't remember his name now. Again, a neat guy, very adamant about his position, his job. But 8 years ago, once again, my dad throws the Bigfoot topic at him, like he did Rowena, the gal patroller, 10, 15 years earlier, about Bigfoot. Interesting thing about this Hispanic gentleman, he was adamant it doesn't exist, but he starts throwing stuff out there. He starts throwing out details that only those that really follow and research the subject would know. They've never found a bone. Never found bones. There's never been a body.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
He starts throwing more out there that a naysayer or someone in denial or protecting would throw out there.
Uh-huh.
He knew a lot more about the topic than I've never seen one. It was just interesting.
Oh, yeah.
As Dad was talking to him, he's not in there. They never found bones, never found a body. And he threw some other things out there. Says, how do you even know they haven't unless you've actually researched the subject? And again, this Rowena and this gentleman are in the same position that Paul Freeman had,
right?
Patrolling Mill Creek Watershed. So, and Red from 1970. So I never met Paul Freeman. Red, I never met, but these last two. So Rowena is riding her horses through the wilderness or the watershed on trails that don't see people theoretically ever.
Mm-hmm.
So she has the Mill Creek Watershed to herself. And this gentleman here, I don't think he's a horse guy as much as he is probably a driving his truck around the perimeter, up the perimeters. But he just threw stuff out there. If he doesn't exist and you have no interest or knowledge of it, he didn't say he had no interest in knowledge, but from the way his responses, he had an interest in knowledge in the topic. So, and maybe he never has seen her or anything. But anyway, it was interesting. His response said there doesn't exist nothing in there and they've never found bones. There's no pictures and on. So it was just an interesting response from a watershed patrol guy. And maybe he's being honest. He has never seen anything, and here's the reasons why: because he doesn't exist, because there are no bones or pictures or bodies. So, last story on this, and then this is my own experience, and it was just weird. So I had that elk tag, archery elk tag, this last summer. And I just had a weird thing. This is outside the watershed, Mill Creek Watershed. It's outside the Winnebago Canyon Wilderness, but it's adjacent drainages. Again, a very difficult tag to get. They don't give out a lot of tags. Have the whole world yourself, really, and it's just neat remote country. I'm at the bottom of this one canyon. It's not a real deep canyon. Open timber, you can see for 100, 150 yards, big trees, a little bit of brush, some downfalls, but just open country. And I had elk in there bugling. I was getting tours and all that. And there's some other hunters in that unit, but I hadn't seen any vehicles or anyone that where I was going into this, dropping this little side canyon. The road goes right along the ridge next to it. So not overly remote, but still just a lot of country. I get down the bottom. It's getting late afternoon. So right now it's almost 7 o'clock here. It's probably right at the same time, last hour or two at daylight. Get down there. I've got some elk bugling and all that stuff. And I'm walking down. I got down. I had to hike from where I parked up high. It's probably about a 20-minute hike. And it gets down this big open timbered flats, 400 or 500 yards across. And I can see real well. And I'm walking through the timber. And all of a sudden I hear this deep, deep voice, 7. And someone said the number 7. And I stopped. I thought, crap, is there someone else down here? Because there's bull elk bugling. This is what we're all hunting for. Did I stumble on some hunters in here? And right where the noise came from, to my kind of in front of me to the left, 50, 75 yards, it seemed. I mean, I can see the whole dang forest. It's big open timber. There's no one there. I thought, well, heck, if there's hunters down there, it was a human voice, but a very deep, deep, guttural, throaty voice. 7. I stop and I go, well, I'm backing out. There's other hunters down here. I'm not going to go infringe on them if they're working these elk that are down here bugling and calling us. I don't need any conflict if they're already down here. So I stopped and I sat down for about 5 or 10 minutes. And the voice I heard, the 7, should have been within my view, my line of sight, as open timber, little clumps of brush in there. There's nothing that would hide anyone. I mean, they could be behind a tree and you're out of sight, whatever. But I stayed there for about 5 or 10 minutes and there's no one there. So that was just weird. So I thought, well, I'm going to start walking very cautiously and maybe someone is there. Maybe they're sitting there waiting and maybe they saw me. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they're so focused on these elk that are a couple hundred yards away, screaming and bugling in the timber out further in the flat towards where the creek is in the bottom. And I start walking, and there'd been a lot of elk in there, so there's really good game trails, even though there's downfalls and it's dry, bone dry, it's snappy and crunchy. So I started walking real slowly because if there's hunters there, it says I heard you say 7. I don't know why you said the number 7. And but if there's hunters there, it's okay, then I'll get out of your hair. I'm not coming friends. But I started walking. I'm looking. I've been there. I said been 5 or 10 minutes. I never saw a soul. And why I didn't hear it in my head, but I heard a deep voice say 7. And very, 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 like there's a deep throaty.
That's some weird stuff, man.
Yeah. And I'm a realist, man. That's just, I can't explain it. But once again, just some notes for the archives. Okay. Can I get into chapter 3, final chapter?
Heck yes.
All right. My local neighborhood, Mount Hood in the Northern Oregon Cascades. Several, again, the same thing. It's just friends, acquaintances, whatever. So I mentioned a little bit ago about these twin brothers, good friends of mine. Rob and Dennis, we'll call them. And that's what their wives call them too. They grew up in Estacada, which is the Clackamas River, which is the Bigfoot highway that Joe wrote his book about. And they grew up in a little community of Estacada, which is growing like crazy now. But they lived a few miles west of Estacada. And there's a main highway that goes from the Portland metro area, Milwaukee, Clackamas, out to Estacada. And they lived about a mile off the highway down in right along the Columbia River. And a little bit of kind of, he referred to it as hippie community. His dad was a Vietnam vet. Mom just salt of the earth, neat gal. And they just lived in this little communal neighborhood off the highway. And again, we're talking now in the 70s, probably, early 80s. And lived in this, I can't remember the name of the neighborhood, but 10, 15 homes where you go out across the flats, you kind of drop down to the level of the Clackamas River down there. So the one brother, Dennis, and again, this as I look at my notes here, mid-70s, they had a yellow lab named Moon. And again, the bus would drop them off on the highway. So they had like a mile walk to home. And they're out in the country. They're mountain kids and all that. And it wasn't that big a deal back then. Your kids walked a mile to the bus stop in the morning. They walked a mile home when the bus dropped them off in the afternoon. So for some reason, it was just one of them. It was just Dennis. Rob wasn't with him. I don't remember the whole reason why, but so, but every day in the afternoon, I guess Moon, their yellow lab, would walk them to the bus in the morning and go home. Then Moon would go the mile jaunt up to the highway and be there waiting for the boys to get off the bus in the afternoon after school. So Dennis gets off the bus one afternoon. Moon's sitting there waiting for him. And it probably got roughly a half mile across some flat, open pasture stuff. And the road just kind of starts winding down to the Clackamas River bottom, 300, 400, 500 foot elevation drop, roughly, all timber. And this is the twin brothers. So Dennis, he's walking, he goes across the flats, he starts walking the gravel road, heading down the side hill, and it's a timber. And all of a sudden, he said, Moon just stops and starts staring up from the timber. And again, this is kind of where I start kind of filling in the links. I think he was looking off to the right downhill. And all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. And this big, tall, dark, hair-covered thing takes off running through. There's ferns and trees, a lot of brush and all that. Takes off running. And I remember one of the things, there was a tall standing snag or stump. The thing ran through this stump and the thing exploded. The stump did. And kept on running. And so in addition to the stump that exploded that this thing ran through, one other thing just looked like it had an arrow quiver stuck over its shoulder, over its back, over its shoulders. So because you've heard stories of clothing and whatever I have over the years, whatever. And then he goes, how he reacted, whatever. But then him and Moon continue walking home, and that was the end of the story. So that's the only experience Dennis ever had. And the funny thing is, whenever he and I do talk about it, he goes, I don't share that story with anyone. And his twin brother, these are twin brothers that they're still attached to the hip. They've been involved in business. They're both in early retirement in their late 50s, been home builders. They talk daily. They do a lot of stuff together. Their wives are good friends. They've done a lot. Dennis will not bring the topic up around his twin brother, Rob, because Rob laughs at him. So the one thing in their entire lives that they probably don't share is, they've obviously shared it, but Dennis just doesn't share it with anyone. As we know, a lot of people don't share their stories or encounters, but
no, they don't, or they wait until they're retired and not a cop anymore. That's a big thing too.
Right. Yeah. There's that too. So anyway, that's Dennis' story. And he and I don't even talk about it, but like every 5 years or so, or 6, 7, who knows, we might be having a beer or something. And but I already know his story. He already knows he shared it with me, and there's no reason to talk anymore about it. I did invite him, actually, that thing that Joe Beelart sent us up to by Skookum Meadows, again, however many years ago, 15, 16, 17, 18, I don't remember. But I did invite Dennis, but he just, he had his experience, his encounter, and he's good with that. So moving on to that, another gentleman, this guy played some softball with and against years ago, going back probably in the 80s. And then through a mutual a hunting forum that we both belonged to, he saw my name on there, and he's active on this, and this is going back several years as well. But up here where I live, or where we live, right at the base of Mount Hood, the Salmon Huckleberry Wilderness, you got Mount Hood Wilderness, you got the Bull Run Watershed, which is the watershed for the Portland metropolitan area, which is a much larger watershed than Mill Creek for Walla Walla. This is a watershed that's feeding hundreds of thousands of people, not tens of thousands, and to close the public entry. So we're up. We've got mountains, we got wilderness, everything around here. So this gentleman, Scott, who I had played ball with, he shared a story with me again several years ago, but we have 3 rivers that come together down here, the Salmon River, the Sandy River, and the Zigzag River. And there's a cool little golf course, beautiful golf course, actually, right where these rivers come together. And also used to be some fantastic salmon and steelhead fishing back in the day, not nearly as fruitful as it used to be. But he told me a story a while back where he was going to fish he's going down the golf course to access the Salmon River to go fishing one morning, and saw had a Bigfoot run across the fairway in front of him, like right at daybreak. And again, right off the backside of that Salmon River, it's just all salmon huckleberry wilderness, which has its own number of stories and encounters and sightings from, again, over the decades. So, and it's as simple as that. It would have been the 80s, early 90s, early morning. And there's some homes, really nice homes, lots of this golf course on some sides, but once you get to that riverside, it's all wilderness on the backside. But he had Bigfoot. I don't remember if he exactly said just something tall and hairy, but we were messaging back and forth, I think email or whatever, messaging through this hunting forum. Maybe I can't recall exactly how the communication exchanged, but told me about, I had Bigfoot run across the dang fairway, this golf fairway in front of him on the way to go fish the Salmon River one morning, which would have been midsummer, because that's typically it was a summer steelhead fishery, which July, August, September, October is the prime season, their time of year for that fishery back in the day when it was a popular fishery. No. And again, the whole area, Highway 26, it goes over Mount Hood. There's the Cliff has mentioned several stories. There's been some other stuff. I mean, where we live here, I throw off a number of stories I've heard over the years, but these are just stories I've heard. There aren't people I personally know and or have heard those stories from them. So, another acquaintance of mine, a little further south, Timothy Lake is a big popular lake in the North Cascades here. It's just south of Mount Hood. An acquaintance of mine, I don't know him real well, but he's a good friend, but another good friend of mine, which I'll get to in a bit. But he was right around 2000 hunting, again, from our house here. He's probably 20, 30 miles south of here. Remote little area, right along, there's a big Warm Springs Indian Reservation that we can't hunt on, but he's down there hunting one evening, and camped in this remote little camp spot. Not even a campground, just spike parked rig, hiked in a mile or two, and elk make a lot of noise during their mating season. The elk were bugling and all that. And they said all of a sudden a fan like that is just shut off. And it was late in the evening, but he thought it was just kind of weird the way they just shut down. And he was in the timber, they're echoing all over it, and it was late enough. I don't think he could really hunt, but he was kind of out a late evening scout for the next day. And he had a buddy coming up to meet him that night to camp with him. So this guy, he goes back to his truck. I can't remember if he had a canopy on the bed of his pickup. Kind of think that's what it was. And so he gets back to his truck. It's roughly that time of year archery season. It's probably getting dark, 9:30. So gets in the bed of his pickup around 10. Again, I don't remember all the exact details, but about a half hour after he's in his pickup, all of a sudden his truck shutters. It shakes.
Whoa.
And he wasn't expecting his buddy there till later. I can't remember, midnight-ish, after midnight, whatever. I mean, it's not that far out there from the Portland metro area. I don't remember where his buddy is coming from, but what the whole schedule was. But he expecting his buddy later then. And no vehicles came up because he's in a pretty remote part of the forest where he wasn't on a main road. He's off a side road back in the timber there. I don't know exactly where he's camped, but I have a pretty good idea. And the truck shutters. And he goes, my buddy's screwing with me. No headlights. It's dead quiet out that time of night. You'd have heard a vehicle within a half mile or a mile of you approaching. Headlights or heard a vehicle, heard nothing. And the truck shuttered. I can't remember if it did it more than once. May have, may not have. But it freaked him out. And I thought his buddy's screwing with him. And I can't remember if he couldn't fall asleep or if he opened his canopy and shone a flashlight. I don't remember any of those details at all. But I know it really kind of waked him out. And then a couple hours later, his buddy shows up. Whether it was midnight or so, again, I can't remember specifics, but he and I had that conversation a number of years ago. But he just shook my truck in the middle of the night, or in the late evening. So, and I've got another story with him here in a little bit. So something bumped his truck at night. So next story up the Clackamas River, which this is kind of all the Clackamas River drip area as well. Again, Joe Beelart's country. Good friend of mine, Sean, and this looks like this is probably around 2002 now. So again, we're going back a little bit, but he's hunting up there with his father and I think his brother, and they're up a remote little road, some older clear cuts up there, and Sean climbed up the hill, and again, just kind of the picture I've got, they parked at a dead end road, probably a big round gravel turnabout. So the truck's parked there, him and his dad, and again, maybe brother. I think brother was with him. And Sean starts working his way up the hill, deer hunting, I believe. So it would have been early October. So Sean works his way up a hill, gets way up above this older clear cut. The clear cut was, I'm going to estimate, because trees in this country can grow back pretty quick. Within 5 or 10 years, you're starting to get some trees that are probably, 10, 20 foot tall if they've been replanted. And he got way up above on the clear cut, and he gets up there and he can see their pickup or their truck parked way down below. And whether it's 200 yards or 1,000 yards, I don't know, is ways down there, I'm sure. Then all of a sudden, down below Sean, and this, again, from what I recollect, it was probably midday, late morning, midday, early afternoon. All of a sudden, down below Sean, on a pretty steep slope, this big boulder goes flying straight up in the air.
Really?
And comes down. Thing is, you didn't hear the thud of it coming down. Then this big boulder goes back up in the air and comes down. And I don't remember how many times it happened, 2, 3, 4, 5 times I recall. But he's going, someone's screwing with me here. And if I recall, he said somebody thought it might be his brother. And he shouts out. And how far this was down, I don't think it was a long distance away, but I'm estimating probably it might have been 30 to 50 yards down the hill below him. But this big rock flying way up in the air, coming down and not thudding when it hits the ground. Then he made a comment to something like, "Hey, I know it's you," or quit screwing with me, whatever. Then he sees his brother and his dad way down at the truck moments later. So it wasn't his brother, it wasn't his father. And he and I've talked about it a couple of times. And he goes, he always had an eerie feeling whenever he drove this little road that went back to that little gravel parking area, whatever. So he and we've actually been talking. I just talked with him a week or two ago. This is going up in the forest these days. There's so many dang people up there. Weekends are just as you almost you can't get away from people. It seems like anymore. People get in the woods because our forest is extremely thick and rugged. But they're camping at the end of roads. They're hiking. They're going to all the lakes and recreation areas and trailheads and whatever. But he just got a new job where he has Fridays off, and I have a relatively flexible schedule. So I told him, man, once you get in your new job, get squared away, let's sneak up there for a Friday. I want to go up. He hasn't been up there for several years himself, but he's always had this weird, eerie feeling about that place, even prior to this rock tossing incident. Man, so I'm just curious where he's at. I just know he's up the Clackamas River somewhere. But yeah, rock flying up in the air, coming down. It went up several times, and never thudded when it hit the ground, because a rock like that, you're gonna hear it plus feel it.
Wow, that's weird, man.
I don't know.
Just playing up, catching it.
Yeah.
Huh.
And then, like I said, that he made some comment. I remember he made a comment. He thought, okay, I know it's you. Well, such. And then there's brother and dad way down the truck, hundreds of yards away. So I don't have any answers for you. I just got the questions.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So where we live, we live in one of the major river drainages comes off Mount Hood, which is an 11,000 plus foot dormant volcano. It's at the top of the mountains, like 7 miles from us right now. And again, from where we're at, to the south of us, we've got Zigzag Mountain, 2,025 feet above us. Behind us, we've got the Bull Run Watershed, which is another 1,500, 2,000 feet to the ridgetop above us. And the Zigzag Mountain to the south of us has some stories on it. I'll throw a few of those at you. But just up the road from us, we have an older gentleman who, his brother's a log home builder in the area, and he's been involved in the building trades himself. He's pretty much retired now, but so he lives not even a half mile up the road from us, quarter mile probably. Tom. And as we were with him, I guess, when was it, 4th of July? I was with him a couple of weeks ago. And I knew he had stories, but our friends that live up there as well, that are his neighbors, friend Chris, said, hey, you got to talk to Tom sometime. And Chris actually had a story too. But so
couple weeks ago, I finally got to ask Tom. So he has two kind of similar stories, but when he started clearing his land to build his home up there. So again, this is a Sandy River drainage. It's roughly a quarter mile, half mile wide. It's all old mud flows from Mount Hood has erupted over the years, and just the whole valley is a mud flow. Then the forest builds up and grows up. So relatively flat down here. So Tom was clearing his land roughly early 2000s. And then, and probably very two similar stories. And then a couple years later, he used to go to work really early in the mornings. Again, I don't remember if he was contractor back then or home construction or what, but two very similar stories in the early 2000s. Then a couple years later, he'd be out there early in the morning, have a cup of coffee, have a cigarette. And two different times he's been out there early in the morning, and boulders went flying across his yard.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh man.
And the difference between the two stories that he gave me, there were two different times that it happened. And so he told our friend Chris, who we're better friends with, that Tom we know pretty well, but he's been out there 3 a.m, a cigarette, drinking coffee, clearing the land, and he's been up here long enough. 20-ish years ago, there wasn't as there's several homes up our valley, but not a ton. But he is probably one of the earlier people developing the land up here and clearing it and putting his home on. Yeah, you're out there early in the morning, and dang boulder goes flying across from one tree line out across your yard. And boulders, how big they are, I don't know, but random at 3 a.m. And it's happened on two different occasions over the course of a couple of years.
And the right time for weird stuff with Bigfoot to happen too. 3 a.m. in the morning, no doubt, man.
So let me see as I'm looking at my notes here. So this ties into him as well. He mentioned so like I said, up behind his house as well, just south of him is this Zigzag Mountain, which is one rugged, steep, thick, bluffy mountainside. There's a trail on the top. There's a couple trails that go up this side, up some creek drainages to some lakes. They're all hike-in lakes. And I want to go hike the face of that mountain down this side. It's going to be brutal. I wouldn't hike up it. I don't know if anyone, you could, but you wouldn't want to do it again. Coming down won't be a whole lot more pleasant because it's steep, rugged, and there's some bluffy stuff. There's a lot of thick alder thickets. It's a no man's land, so to speak, for the most part. But anyway, so Tom, as I'm looking at my notes here, he heard a bellowing howl coming up off of there. It lasted like 30 seconds. Then so above his house, which again, he's that direction from you, again, less than a half mile. And then he said like it lasted like 30 seconds, and then he got a response down Zigzag Ridge later.
Oh,
immediate response. So let me see the notes. A bellowing howl up on Zigzag Mountain, and 30 seconds later, a response down the ridge to the west. Then I said, he just told me this story a few weeks ago, but I had the right notes. He goes, "You ever seen Finding Bigfoot? It sounds like the sound Bobo makes."
Man, oh, that freaked me out. That's one of my things, Rick. Someday I want to hear a vocalization like that. Someday, man. Oh, well, boy.
And that's right up behind us. I mean, that's
wow.
I can long range ride. As a crow flies, it's 500-600 yards behind me. It's the side of the Zigzag Mountain, and it runs for 7, 8, 10 miles that way, right up to Mount Hood. So I will jump forward a little bit. So our mutual friend Chris, him and his wife and kids live right there next to Tom. His young daughter Lily, and this is going back roughly 2010. They heard screams up on the back side of the Zigzag Mountain, and Lily, who was roughly about 8 then, I remember Chris, Dad, told me this. He goes, Lily goes, "There's something up there." So Chris heard him up there, and I think most of these, the call that Tom talked about, what Chris and Lily, I think they've been springtime vocalizations. And again, I'm pretty sure I don't have exact dates or times or whatever, but it seems to me it's been like March, April, May-ish type of stuff. So only a couple more for you. Again, over outside of Estacada on the Clackamas River. Are you very familiar with this country up here?
I have the Oregon Bigfoot Highway. And so I know when you say stuff like Estacada and Zigzag Mountain, I know like They sound very familiar, but I've never like actually gone out to the area yet personally. But like I've read the book by Joe.
Well, and I've got to get it. So
Yeah.
So Estacada is where the Clackamas River comes out of our Cascade Mountains. Estacada is like at the gateway. It's where the mountains meet and the foothills meet the flatlands, and that's Estacada. Small little rural community, been there for a million years, whatever, but it's grown like crazy now, and there's a ton of recreation that goes up. But up the Clackamas River, a lot of camping, a lot of water play, a lot of fishing, all that stuff. Is a bunch of people, especially in the summertime, go up that way. And there's some people live up there, but away from that, down towards Gresham, which is one of our bigger, more better communities to Portland. A little community outside of that called Boring. Again, I'm going back years ago now. As I put these notes together accumulated them over the years, I kind of estimated some of them. So roughly around 18 years ago. I've always had dogs, we chocolate labs in particular, and love to bird hunt. I just like getting out with my dog and busting my butt and sweating and having a good time with the dog and getting family out there, whatever. Sometimes spending days with friends. So one day I pull up in this little gas station in the town of Boring, Oregon, and got my dog with me. It's summertime, windows rolled down, dog sticking her head out. Every time you go to a gas station, you're hoping they'll give you a milk bone to chew on.
Mm-hmm.
And a young dude comes up, pumps our gas because we still we're just finally getting to pump our own gas out here. It's been attended served for forever. Anyway, guy comes out, pumps our gas, and starts talking about the dog and, you hunt birds? He goes, yeah, this is my second lab, and I love bird hunting and I just love getting out. Then he looks at me and he starts talking about hunting grouse, which I hunted grouse a little bit. They're more of a forest bird, where I hunt the other types of birds, pheasant, chuck, or whatever. And I've hunted some grouse. They're fun to hunt. Neat, you get to go in the forest. And asked about grouse hunting. He goes, yeah, we hunt almost anything. Then he goes, yeah, there's a real good place up the Clackamas. Then he kind of tilts his head. He goes, you ever heard of Bigfoot Acres?
Bigfoot Acres?
I go, no.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So it's a little place outside of Estacada. He gave me some rough directions. I didn't make, no, there's enough roads and enough area up there. Ever heard of Bigfoot Acres? No. And so he told me, you go up this one road, go here, there, you park there and all that. And there's all kinds of grouse. I said, so why's it called Bigfoot Acres? He goes, Bigfoot. Matter of factly, you go, is he there? And the kid goes, shakes his head and turns to walk away, helps another car just pulled in. Fill up with gas.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So that being said, there's a ranger station in Estacada, Estacada Ranger District, ranger station for the Mount Hood National Forest. And I've heard stories for years. You may have, I know Joe has and Cliff has and other people, but supposedly there's a sightings book in there that doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist?
Exactly. Yeah. You go ask for it, and they don't know what you're talking about, but supposedly there's a book in there. And I've heard that for 20 years.
There's gotta be.
And I know people have gone in asking for it, and then they don't have any idea what you're talking about.
Rick, did you ever go up to Bigfoot Acres?
I never got the exact. He gave me the rough up here. There's so many forest roads, and again, once you get past the Cicada, up in the area where it was, there's some ranches and some. There's no communities or towns up there, but there's just plain logging roads and forest roads and this and that. He gave me a rough idea. I mean, it's just a casual chat. I wasn't. I mean, I'm obviously interested in Bigfoot, but as he gave me that info, and I tried to make a mental note, but then as I tried to fine tune it, it's that all that country's Bigfoot can shoot there.
No, absolutely.
So
absolutely,
that's why I was going to go to the exact road to the dead end and go to Bigfoot Acres to look for grouse / Bigfoot. I probably had as much a chance of going down another road and taking a right instead of a left and probably finding Bigfoot. I guess. So I don't know. I never did go there. And again, and I've always wondered. I wish I would have gotten better details, but we were talking bird hunting, not Bigfoot. I just know the general area, but across that's on. Like I said, that's on the north. I guess you could call it even the east side of the Clackamas River. You go across, you got Goat Mountain. I can't remember. There's Hillock Burn Road. There's all kinds of stories and stuff there as well, and on and on. But so I never went to Bigfoot Acres, and I couldn't tell you exactly where it's at, but it's up there somewhere.
Maybe a listener knows about Bigfoot Acres, and they can email me at bigfootsociety at gmail.com.
I've Google searched it before.
I can hook Rick up.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'm right here. Cool. I've Google searched it. Nothing comes up on it.
Oh, I'm sure.
That up behind that general area, you got Mount Mitchell, which I think Joe in his book, actually, there's a trackway from Mount Mitchell, which is up in that same country and all that. But and so I won't get into a lot more specifics up there because there's quite a few lakes and remote campground stuff that between Joe and Cliff. They've got a lot of people out there in the field themselves, and there's a lot of stories that come out of all that country. For those that are actively out there doing more than I'm doing out in the woods. So anyway, Bigfoot Acres. That's my story.
Yeah, dude, you got to get this book. I got the book right here next to me. Bigfoot Hike.
Well, like I said, yeah,
it's so good.
Yeah, well, I'm sure. And actually, Joe had told me about it back before he even published the thing.
Oh, that's awesome.
But again, I do need to get it, and I need to get him to sign it. Okay, I've got like 2 or 3 more that I have to go eat dinner.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, you got to be just starving by now, Rick.
I'm fine. No,
got to do it.
This is quelling my appetite. Yeah. So, again, from where we live, we camp where we live. Less than 2 miles from us is National Forest boundary.
Wow.
And this time of year, our little mountain road gets a lot of traffic because there's 4 or 5 campgrounds up here, 3 or 4. Then there's a lot of trailheads that take you. The Pacific Crest Trail, which is our big international trail, goes from Canada all the way down to Mexico, is a 15-minute drive from us. And several other trailheads. A lot of them go up to the base of Mount Hood and all around. Like I said, this zigzag mountain up here. So, and I mentioned there's a couple trails on this side that take you up to these remote little mountain lakes. But another friend of ours, acquaintance, or not tight friends, but he works for Clackamas County, which is one of the big metropolitan counties in the area. He runs search and rescue. And he was telling me a story, that's 5, 6, 7 years ago, he was telling me. So just up past our house, as you go up towards the trailheads that are up here, going up the Sandy River and heading towards Mount Hood and backside of Zigzag Mountain. Several summers ago, roughly 2010, is when this shooting occurred. So there was a hiker or hikers lost up there, just didn't come back. So in the summertime, again, it starts to warm up here. You start getting a lot of breezes in the mountains. And as the mountain winds go, it's just a lot of noise, birds are squawking and stuff. So they like to do, especially in the summers, especially if weather conditions permit. It's not like it's snowing or going to be sub-freezing or whatever. They prefer to do their search and rescues at night because it's dead calm. People can shout and holler your name. You can hear people that might be injured that can barely whimper. You can, just the sound carries so much better in the dead of night. Mm. So, Scott, this gentleman's name, heading the county search and rescue, and they've got their posses, and they've got a lot of nonprofits and other search and rescue organizations that like to help out and lend a hand. So they were, I think it was an individual hiker. I can't remember if it was a couple. I think it's just an individual just didn't show up. And so they'd go up and set up a base just a couple miles up from our house. And this hiker or hikers was up on somewhere on Zigzag Mountain. Again, there's not a lot of trails up there. And you shouldn't get off trail. There's no reason to, because it's just rugged country. I'm not saying you couldn't roll off or fall off or stumble or get injured or whatever. Who knows what? People disappear in our mountains every year or two. Someone disappears with no sign, no reason. They find a car at a trailhead and there's no evidence of anything afterwards, or else their camp is vacant and they never be seen again. And again, there's not much reason to get off any of the trails in this whole area because it's inhospitable country. If you're hunting, that's one thing, but most of these people are just day hiking and or overnighting or whatever. But so anyway, the Scott and their group gets up there one evening, and several groups go out, a couple different trailheads. Some might have been on horses. I don't remember the whole exact scenario. And you go out in pairs, 2 people at a time, and then at night they're going out at night. So it's roughly like 2 a.m. Gets a radio call from one of the couples. We're coming down. And Scott goes, "Did you find them?" They said, "Nope, we're coming down." Thinking, well, hell, this is the prime search and rescue time. 2 a.m, dead quiet, and all that other stuff, like for all the reasons I mentioned. So why the heck are they coming down? So hour and a half later, I don't remember how long, but these people come down and go, "Why in the heck did you guys come down?" They said, "There's something up there." And this is kind of word for word as well. There's something up there. It says, it doesn't want us up there, and we don't want to be there.
Whoa.
And it was, something just started screaming and carrying on, I guess, relatively close to them. And they just pretty much, They didn't want us there. We didn't want to be there. So they came off the mountain and quit their search and rescue efforts. And this is then, and so the guy, to explain this to us, like I said, he works for Clackamas County Deputy Sheriff's Department, search and rescue. And they came off the mountain. So that's just when something started raising hell up there. It didn't want us there, and we didn't want to be there.
Oh my goodness.
And if you looked at this mountain, if you're ever here, I can look at it daily. It's right out my back door. It's, if I could live in that environment, didn't want to be found, that's the ideal place. And I want to climb down that mountain from top to bottom. I've got a couple different ridges, a couple different drainages. It's going to be brutal. And I'm not a spring chicken anymore. I can still do it. It's gravity to help me down the dang hill. But I just want to see what's in the middle of that mountain, because there's no trails in the middle. There's a couple of little trails that work their way up some creek drainages, feel the top, but there's miles and miles and miles of non-vertical, but extremely steep, rugged, rough, bluffy, or North Oregon Cascades forest.
Wild. Oh man.
Yeah.
It's got to be beautiful out
It's
in
awesome.
your area.
It's cooler than heck. We left heck out of it. It's really, really neat, especially this time of year. So that being said, around Zigzag Mountain, between Highway 26 on the backside through the little community of rhododendron and Welch's, and up this way, a friend of Cliff's had a sighting just up the road from us. We're real similar in the close proximity to where the Scott, the Clackamas County search and rescue guy. Cliff had a buddy of his about 8 or 9 years ago, woke up one morning up there looking and had a sighting out of his camper window right at the base of the mountain one morning. But yeah, there's in the last 20, 25 years, there's been several sightings between all around here. And that's just stuff I've heard of. All right, let me throw
Crazy.
2 more at you. Then I'm done. So I mentioned to you the guy that was hunting about an hour and a half from here, 20, 30, 40, 50 miles, whatever, that had something bump his truck in the middle of the night.
Right.
And his buddy's going to be there, and 2 hours later, whatever, his buddy shows up. So he was hunting with our mutual friend, Ron, in the same general area. Not quite that far. Big river bottom, big meadows and all that stuff. And Ron is my one guy I think I mentioned earlier, who is a retired logger, spent his entire time in the woods. He's out there even as retired. He's a big time photographer. He does a lot of stuff outdoorsy, trail cameras and all that. And he's a non-believer because he spent his entire life in the woods, in the Cascades and on the Coast Range. So Ron and this other gentleman, Dave, they went down and hunted this big long meadow one day. And again, we're talking this back 2013. It looks like September 2013 archery hunting. And as they're working through these flats, you got a big meadow, and you got a lot. This river bottom is about a half mile wide, and there's some big cedar trees in there, big cedar swamp, a lot of elk in there usually. And they're working their way through the timber, and it's open timber, kind of a little bit of brush, huckleberries and rhododendrons, but typically in some of that stuff you can see 200-300 yards, which is in our forest around here, that's quite a distance. And they look, and a ways from 100, 200 yards, they see another hunter. Now, that's really weird, because the only access point where they came in from is really about the only place you could park there, and there's no other rig park there. And all of a sudden, there's a hunter down in the river bottom. And again, river bottom is a high mountain valleys. Bottoms. So there's another hunter there. They were really surprised. So then the hunter walked behind a tree, and again, it was roughly 100 yards away, if I recall correctly. But it looked like a big dude, dark, all dark clothing, quote unquote clothing. Walked behind a tree. Never saw him again. And as they go walking over there, there's kind of a little dip and a ravine, because in some of these rivers, as they meander, you get this. They'll cut a bank and they'll switch channel, whatever. I think if I recall, there's kind of a little dip or ravine behind it, a little cut bank. But they slowly worked their way over there, because this hunter kind of went behind a tree and never saw him again. Walked over there, never saw a hunter, didn't find anything. And so this Ron says, in all my years in the woods, that's the first time I've seen something and not been able to identify it. Mm. He's still an unbeliever, but he says, not sure what it was.
Man, just a random.
Yeah. So, and he and I had that on one of our hunting forums. That's how I met this Ron. neat guy, and it's got a lot of loyal followers. He'd actually made that post on our hunting forum again back in 2013. That the first time I've seen anything and never been able to identify it. But he and I, a couple years later, we were out driving around out in the mountains, and I brought the subject up, and he's still a adamant non-believer. But he goes,
really?
That's
really interesting.
I have no idea what I saw. So anyway, it was just coming from a guy like that. And lastly, you had mentioned that one of your speakers a while back had dropped a name and dropped a very specific location somewhere. And I know that specific name, and I know some of his specific locations, and coincidentally, so it's yeah. So, and coincidentally, it's an area I'm very familiar with myself.
Okay,
roughly near home. Yeah, neat little ponds, meadows, and Cliff. Did I say that? We go up there. You go up there and just drink some local beers and play his. He's a musician. He plays his guitar. And he says, more often than not, I get something happens in the middle of the night. Might just be a knock at 2 a.m. or whatever. But in very, very near that location, and he mentioned that place randomly to me several years ago, and I don't think we even talked about that specific location. He's thrown a couple names at me, but it's all country I know. Mm-hmm. But within about a mile of that, there's a big deep canyon, and there's an old logging road that goes down it, and it's all heavily timbered. And I have 3 different, what I would call trackways that have come off these steep cut banks. I sent pictures of Joe Villard. I sent them to Cliff, sent them to Todd Neese is another name I'll mention if you know Todd. He actually lives within 5 minutes of me here.
Oh, does he really?
Yeah. We had a couple of beers a month or so ago. But
funny.
But they're not definitive by any means, but a couple of them. I'll send you some of the photos later on if you like. But
yeah, definitely.
A couple of them are older and washed out. Even the best ones weren't. But the thing is, and even Cliff was trying to poo-poo on them, but could be deer, elk, or bear. Well, I hunt deer and elk and bear, and I've seen a lot of deer and elk and bear, and I've seen a lot of tracks. First of all, these have a straight toe edge.
That's a big deal.
A deer hoof, a bear, and the substrate it was in was a very hard packed cut bank, and they're long. You could think it was someone's, and if there were people walking on this cut bank, it's a very, very, very remote road and in an area that people wouldn't have really very little reason to be up on that hill to be walking down. You could see if they stepped side hills trying to come down this cut bank where their feet could have slipped, but the straight edge was about 8 inches. That's a small foot to be walking and making the impressions that were on this cut bank coming down. And then I found a couple older ones that were all very indefinite, but you just see large impressions walking up this cut bank again. And this is near where this little pond and meadow is. What's his face likes to hang out. I don't know how often it goes up there now, but and it's in a remote, rugged little canyon. But and I was up there about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I haven't been to this road and this cut banks for a couple of years now. I always look at the cut banks. It's about a 2-mile section there that it's thick, brushy up high. The whole bottom is just a thick, rugged jungle. So I don't know what made those impressions, but one of them, there's like 5 or 6 impressions going up this cut bank, and they're all sizable. They've got a straight, what I'd call toe edge at the top end.
Yep.
That's wild. That's all I got for you.
Wow. I mean, it's cool to hear that area, someone else has found something cool in an area close to that, and I'm being vague, but you get what I'm saying. Like, yeah. That's cool.
Yeah, like I've got nothing earth-shattering, groundbreaking, whatever. I told you that before. I've got no encounters, nothing, from like nose to nose with me, and we arm wrestled or whatever, but
Rick, this has been a fascinating chat of like just a lifetime of collected stories and like how, I mean, you pretty much had some really cool experiences chatting with people involved with Bigfoot history in a way, which is very cool as well. But thank you, man.
Yeah, well, you bet. No, my pleasure. Like I said, I could throw other second or third or fourth hand stories, but these are all, vast majority, it's either, there's people I know. And or the random thing at the gas station, the kid asked about Bigfoot acres, but it was a personal encounter between he and I.
To Bigfoot acres. We got to track that down. Listeners, if you know what Bigfoot acres is, please email me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. We have to track that down.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. Like I said, I'd love to.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of roads up there. It's hard to say, but pinpoint. I wish the kids still worked there, but you got an 18-year-old working at a gas station 20 some years later, or 18 years, or however many years,
probably
not working there anymore. But anyway, it's just you and I have gone back and forth for a number of months, and I said I got a lot of stories for you. Some people might fall asleep on, but
I think that people are going to be very interested. My listeners love episodes like this. Rick, thank you so much for reaching out and taking your time. And this has been just a really fun chat. And keep me in the loop if anything else cool happens, man.
I know where to find you. I said I don't go out looking, man, but I keep my eyes peeled, definitely.
Cool.
All right. Hey, thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's the list. All right, I'm going to use this space this week to announce that I'll be at the Sasquatch Summerfest in Oak Ridge, Oregon as an attender. I won't be presenting or anything, but I'll be hanging out, trying to interview people that have had Bigfoot encounters. If you're from the Oak Ridge, Oregon area or surrounding and you've had a Bigfoot experience, please contact me directly, bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Also, Priscilla was nice enough that if you get your tickets through SasquatchSummerfest.com and use code BigfootSociety, you can get 50% off the cost of your tickets, which is a big amount. So code Bigfoot Society to get 50% off your tickets, SasquatchSummerfest.com, and helps out the podcast as well. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.
Her and I can get on here and we can tell our stories. Maybe there's somebody else out there listening that's too afraid to tell their story. Maybe this will give them the courage to come out and not feel so bad about it. Who cares what anybody thinks? I know what I saw. I know what's out there. That's all I care about.
Please let people know. Please let them know. If you ever see one of these things, you need to tell. Because if you don't, then shame on you. You know? Shame on you.